The hospital waiting room smelled like hand sanitizer and fear. I sat in that uncomfortable plastic chair, watching other men pace nervously while their wives gave birth. I was different. I wasn't nervous, I was already doing math in my head. The prenatal appointment had gone perfectly. Our daughter was healthy. Everything was on schedule. I smiled at a nurse walking past and checked my phone. 17 missed calls from my lawyer. That seemed odd. I decided to call back after the appointment ended. I didn't know that my entire world was about to collapse. I didn't know that my wife, the woman I loved, the mother of our unborn child, was sitting in a lawyer's office right now, signing papers that would demand half of everything I'd built. I didn't know that by the time our daughter took her first breath, the legal machinery to destroy me would already be in motion. What I did know was that I needed to stay calm. I needed to think. I needed to remember something that nobody else seemed to know about my life. I needed to remember that I'd spent the last 15 years preparing for exactly this moment. You need to get to your lawyer's office immediately, my brother James said when I finally checked my voicemail. His voice was tight, controlled, but I could hear the panic underneath. The papers were filed this morning. She's asking for half of everything. I stood in the hospital parking lot and let that sink in. Half of everything. Everything meant the real estate holdings, the investments, the business I'd built from nothing. Everything meant approximately $40 million. My friends started texting within the hour. Dude, I heard what happened. That's brutal, man. She's going to destroy you. My family gathered around me like I was already dead. My mother called crying. My father's lawyer called with worst-case scenarios. Everyone assumed the same thing. I was finished. They looked at me that night in my office, waiting for me to explode, to cry, to rage against the injustice. I sat calmly at my desk, reviewing the paperwork, and didn't say a word. My silence terrified them more than anger would have. My brother finally asked the question everyone was thinking. Did you ever protect yourself? I looked up at him and smiled. Let me tell you a story, I said. Jessica and I met in college. She was studying business, I was studying engineering, and we both worked part-time at the campus bookstore. We were broke together, happy together, and completely in love. After graduation, I took a job at a tech startup while she worked in marketing. Our apartment was 1,200 square feet, and we split rent evenly. We didn't have much, but we had plans. Big plans. I told her about my idea for a new software platform. She believed in me when I had nothing but a laptop and a vision. When the startup failed after 2 years, she was there. When I launched my own company at 26 with borrowed money and desperation, she cheered me on. Those early years were the best years. We were building something together, or at least that's what I thought. She moved into my office during late nights. She helped me pitch to investors. She wore my belief in the future like it was her own. The money came slowly, then all at once. By year 5, we were millionaires. By year 10, we were much more than that. I bought her a diamond ring that caught the light like it was alive. I got down on one knee on a beach in Cancun. She said yes, and for a moment, everything felt perfect and permanent. The decision to simplify our finances came after we got married. My lawyer recommended it for family stability. I restructured everything so that my business earnings flowed into a corporate account. I created a joint account for household expenses and gave Jessica full access. I gave her a credit card with a $200,000 annual limit. I gave her a generous monthly allowance. But here's the key thing I did, the thing nobody else knew about. I created something called an asset protection trust. I named myself as the grantor, established it in a state with favorable laws, and deposited the bulk of my wealth into it. My financial advisor warned me. You're essentially telling your wife she can't touch these assets, he said carefully. Won't that damage trust? I thought about it. I thought about the woman I loved, the partner I'd chosen, the mother of my future children. I didn't want to believe I needed protection. But I also didn't want to be naive. I didn't want to be the guy who lost everything because he loved too much. So I signed the documents. The trust was established. 95% of my liquid wealth went into it. The remaining 5%, plus the household allowance, was what I offered to share openly. I told myself it was sensible. I told myself it was just in case. I told myself that the woman I loved would never need to be protected against. The business grew faster than I ever imagined. We went from a small startup to an industry leader. The media called me the next big tech visionary. Magazine profiles highlighted my journey from nothing to everything. Jessica loved the status that came with success. She loved the penthouse apartment, the vacation homes, the charity galas where people recognized us. She wore designer clothes now. She drove a Range Rover. She had a personal assistant. But somewhere along the way, she disengaged from the actual work. She stopped asking about my projects. She stopped caring how the money was made. She only cared that it was made. She became someone who consumed the results of my success without understanding what it took to achieve it. I watched this transformation happen slowly. At first, I thought it was natural. We were building a family. She was busy with wedding planning, then nursery design, then prenatal appointments. But it was more than that. There was a subtle shift in how she looked at money. She didn't see it as something we created together. She saw it as something owed to her. She saw it as her reward for staying with me while I worked. She didn't see her role as support anymore. She saw it as sacrifice. The first real conflict came when I declined to give her access to my business account. She asked casually at dinner, "Why can't I see how much money we have?" I explained that it was easier to manage if one person handled the operations. She smiled and let it go. But I saw something flicker in her eyes. I saw resentment. 3 months later, she asked again. This time she was more direct. "A real partnership means transparency," she said. "You don't trust me." I tried to explain that it wasn't about trust. It was about organizational efficiency. She didn't accept that answer. She started making comments. "Other wives know their finances. Other successful men share everything with their wives. You treat this company like it's your mistress, not your marriage." I felt the pressure. I felt the guilt she was expertly manufacturing. I felt myself being pushed into a corner where either I surrendered my assets or I looked like I didn't trust her. That's when I realized something important. My love for her wasn't enough protection anymore. My belief in her wasn't enough. I had put everything into that trust for a reason I couldn't quite articulate at the time. I had protected myself against something I was too hopeful to name. But now I was starting to understand what it was. I never told Jessica about the restructuring of my holdings. It was done quietly, through my lawyer, in language she wouldn't understand even if she saw the documents. But I didn't do it out of deception. I did it out of responsibility. I set up an asset protection trust and then I went further. I created what's called an irrevocable trust structure, which meant that even I couldn't access the money without meeting very specific conditions. I appointed an independent trustee, a man named Wallace who had been my financial advisor for 15 years. Wallace's only job was to protect those assets according to the trust terms. I also included something that most people never think to include, an activation clause. This clause would trigger if certain conditions were met. Specifically, if I filed for divorce, or if my wife filed for divorce, or if I was sued for a significant amount of money, the trust would lock down completely. No distributions. No access. Nothing. My lawyer said, "Are you sure about this? It's extreme." I was sure. I didn't know why at the time, but some instinct told me that one day, I would need this protection more than I would need liquidity. Some part of me knew this day was coming. Jessica got pregnant in year 13 of our marriage. We were thrilled. Or at least I was thrilled. Looking back, I'm not sure what she felt. The pregnancy was planned. We both agreed it was the right time. She stopped taking birth control. We started trying. 3 months later, she told me she was pregnant. I was overjoyed. I bought her flowers. I took her to the best restaurants. I hired a private maternity trainer. I attended every prenatal appointment. I held her hand during every ultrasound and watched our daughter on the screen. She was perfect. She was real. She was coming. But during those 9 months of pregnancy, something changed in Jessica's attitude. She became less interested in my company, less interested in our relationship, and infinitely more interested in her legal position. I now understand that the pregnancy wasn't about creating a life with me. It was about creating leverage. A pregnant woman has sympathy. A pregnant woman can tell a powerful narrative. A pregnant woman filing for divorce can paint a husband as cruel and uncaring. The courthouse would see her as vulnerable. The judge would see her as needy. A child would make me vulnerable too, because now I didn't just have a wife, I had a daughter depending on me. The emotional betrayal started small. Jessica stopped sleeping in our bedroom. She said the pregnancy was uncomfortable, which was probably true, but she also put a lock on the guest bedroom door. She stopped letting me touch her. She stopped talking to me about anything real. When I asked her about her day, she gave one-word answers. When I tried to plan for the baby's future, she changed the subject. She hired a nanny without consulting me. She started consulting with a therapist without telling me. But the worst part was the documentation. I discovered it by accident one day when I was looking for her phone charger. There was a notebook on her nightstand filled with dates and times. March 12th, James ignored me when I talked about the nursery. April 3rd, James refused to let me see his business accounts. May 20th, James wasn't present for the anatomy scan. Everything was being recorded. Everything was being framed as my failure. Every moment of our marriage was being rewritten as a story of neglect. She was building a case against me before I even knew there was a trial. The worst part was that some of the accusations were true. I had been working a lot. I had been distracted. I had been focused on building the empire rather than nurturing the relationship. But the things she omitted made the picture completely false. She didn't write down the times I was there. She didn't document the nights I stayed home instead of going to investor meetings. She didn't mention that I'd proposed therapy to strengthen our marriage, and she'd refused. In month 7 of the pregnancy, Jessica started demanding access to my restricted accounts. Not asking. Demanding. "I need to know what our financial situation is," she said one evening. "For the baby's security." I explained again, patiently, that the structure was complex and that I could give her summaries of everything. She didn't want summaries. She wanted access. She wanted passwords. She wanted to be able to transfer money without my permission. When I refused, her reaction was immediate and calculated. "You're hiding money from me," she said. "You're preparing to leave me." "No, I'm not," I said. But she wasn't listening anymore. She was in character now, playing the role of the abandoned pregnant wife. She called my mother and told her that I was being controlling. She told her friends that I didn't trust her. She was shaping a narrative, and she was doing it deliberately. That's when my alarm became real fear. That's when I realized this wasn't just a marriage struggling. This was a strategy. She was maneuvering me into a corner where I either surrendered everything or looked like the villain. I thought about the trust. I thought about Wallace. I thought about that activation clause. I had been right to be cautious. I had been right to protect myself. But now I felt guilty for being right. The social pressure was relentless and subtle. Jessica had always been better at people than I was. She had a gift for making friends, for making people care about her narrative, for positioning herself as the sympathetic character in every story. Now she weaponized that gift against me. She started posting pregnancy photos on social media with captions about doing this alone and raising my daughter without real support. Her friends started reaching out to me with concerned messages. "Is everything okay? Jessica seems stressed. You should probably be more present." My own family started subtly siding with her. My mother suggested I hire a marriage counselor. My father asked if everything was okay at home. People I'd known for years started treating me differently, with a distance that suggested they'd made a judgment. Nobody said it directly, but the message was clear. I was the problem. I was the unsupportive husband. I was the absent father-to-be. I was the guy prioritizing money over family. Jessica had rewritten the entire narrative of our marriage to position herself as the victim. And the worst part was that a lot of people believed her, because victim narratives are easier to believe than complex truths. Everyone loves a victim. Nobody loves the guy who's supposedly too busy to care. The divorce papers arrived on a Tuesday morning. My lawyer called first. "She filed this morning," he said, "asking for full custody, substantial child support, half of all marital assets, and attorney fees." Half of all marital assets. That phrase kept repeating in my head. Half of all marital assets. She was claiming that everything I'd built was marital property. The business, the real estate, the investments, the savings, all of it was 50-50 in her mind. What she didn't understand, what she couldn't possibly have known, was that the bulk of those assets weren't marital property. They were protected. They were locked away in a trust that she had no legal claim to. But she didn't know that. She thought she was walking into a courtroom to claim $40 million. She thought I'd left myself exposed. She thought she'd won before the trial even started. Her lawyer had probably told her that I was finished, that I'd be forced to settle to avoid a messy court case, that she had all the leverage. She didn't know about the trust. She didn't know about Wallace. She didn't know about the activation clause. She was walking into this fight believing she had armor, but she was actually walking into nothing at all. I overheard her on the phone with a friend 3 days after filing. She was in the kitchen, not knowing I was in the study with the door cracked open. "He doesn't even know what hit him," she laughed. "My lawyer says it's open and shut. He made all this money during our marriage, so it's half mine. He can't hide it. There's no way." She sounded excited. She sounded confident. She sounded like someone who genuinely believed she'd won the lottery. "I'm going to buy a house," she continued. "Not this one, something fresh, somewhere I can start over. And the child support will be enough that I don't have to work. I can just focus on the baby and my own life." She wasn't talking about me. She wasn't thinking about me. She was already mentally dividing my life into pieces and claiming her share. That's when something shifted inside me. It wasn't anger. It was clarity. I had spent years protecting myself against exactly this. I had created an ironclad legal structure specifically to prevent this scenario. And now that scenario was happening, I felt almost relieved. The waiting was over. The uncertainty was done. Now I could finally use the protection I'd so carefully put in place. Now I could finally prove that I had been right to be cautious. My lawyer insisted I hire a forensic accountant to review Jessica's claims. The accountant's name was Richard, and he was meticulous. He went through every document, every transaction, every filing. 3 days into his review, he called me with an interesting observation. "Your wife's legal team is assuming that all assets are fair game," he said. "But most of your liquid wealth is held in trust. They're either going to be very surprised, or they already know and they're hoping you don't." I explained the trust structure to him. His response was immediate. "That's genius," he said. "Not many people actually do this. Most people talk about it and never follow through. You followed through." He kept digging. He found the irrevocable structure. He found the independent trustee. He found the activation clause. With each discovery, his voice became more impressed. "This is airtight," he said finally. "Assuming the trust was established before any marital issues, she has no claim to any of this. You're looking at maybe 5% exposure, not 50%. 5% versus 50%. That was the difference between a setback and a devastation. That was the difference between my ex-wife getting millions and my ex-wife getting nothing. And I had created that difference years ago, when love had still felt like it would last forever. I decided to let my lawyer explain the trust structure to Jessica's legal team before the court date. I wanted to give them a chance to understand what they were up against. I wanted them to see that this wasn't a case they could win through intimidation or media pressure. My lawyer sent the documentation over with a brief note explaining the nature of the Asset Protection Trust and its implications for the case. For 2 days, Jessica's legal team didn't respond. Then they called. "You need to understand that we will argue that the trust is fraudulent," the lead attorney said. "We'll argue that it was established with intent to defraud and we'll go after it in court." My lawyer smiled. "Go ahead," he said. "The trust was established 15 years ago, before any marital discord, with a reputable trustee, and all the legal requirements were met perfectly. You lose. But please take us to court. Make this public. That's fine with us." The threat died right there. They couldn't prove fraud if there was no fraud. They couldn't attack a structure that had been meticulously documented and perfectly legal. What they could do was accept that they'd lost, that they'd miscalculated, and that their client's confidence had been based on a false understanding of the law. The leverage they thought they had was gone. The armor she thought she was wearing had never existed. The mediation happened on a cold December morning. Jessica walked in wearing a maternity dress that emphasized her pregnancy. She wanted the judge to see her as vulnerable. She wanted the judge to see her as deserving. Her lawyer brought stacks of documents, charts showing my income, analyses of what she believed she was entitled to. They presented their case with confidence. They showed her financial sacrifice. They showed her emotional labor. They showed her as a woman who'd given up her own career to support her husband's ambitions. It was a compelling narrative. It was also incomplete. When it was our turn, my lawyer presented the trust documents. The room went quiet. Not because of drama, but because of clarity. The legal framework was so clear, so ironclad, that there was nothing to argue about. The trust wasn't marital property because it had never been marital property. It was established before marriage, funded with premarital income that had been reinvested, and managed by an independent trustee. It was as separate from the marriage as my college degree was. Jessica's face changed. She looked shocked. She looked angry. She looked like someone who just realized that the fortune she thought she was going to claim didn't belong to her at all. My lawyer walked through it step by step, speaking in simple language. Mr. Patterson established this trust in 2009, before his marriage to Jessica in 2011. The trust holds approximately $38 million. The structure of the trust means it is not considered marital property under state law. The independent trustee, Wallace Cooper, holds legal authority over all distributions. The trust terms specify that no distributions can be made during active litigation. Therefore, the assets held in trust are not subject to division in this divorce proceeding. The opposing lawyer tried to object. Your Honor, this is clearly an attempt to hide assets. It's not hidden, the judge interrupted. It's properly documented, legally established, and predates the marriage. The attorney is correct. These assets are not subject to division. That was it. That was the entire case, solved in 30 seconds of legal clarity. What had seemed like a fortress was actually just a house of cards. What Jessica thought was a guaranteed victory was actually a predetermined loss. I hadn't won because I was smarter than her in the moment. I'd won because I'd been smart enough to protect myself years before the moment arrived. Jessica's lawyer made one last attempt. She stood up and played the final card that most lawyers play when they're losing. Your Honor, my client is 8 months pregnant. She will be raising this child alone. She has given up her career. She has made sacrifices. Doesn't she deserve at least some portion of the marital assets? It was a good move, emotionally. It was designed to make the judge feel sympathetic. It was designed to make me look heartless if I didn't give her something. My lawyer stood up calmly. The court acknowledges the pregnancy and the changes in Ms. Patterson's life. However, the law is clear about what constitutes marital property. My client will provide child support according to state guidelines. He will provide health insurance for the child. He will provide a generous settlement from the 5% of his wealth that is considered marital property. He will remain an active father. But he cannot be compelled to give away assets that are protected by law. The lawyer sat down. The judge looked at Jessica with something that might have been sympathy, but it was also clarity. The law doesn't allow me to divide protected assets, Ms. Patterson. I understand this isn't what you expected, but that's not your husband's fault. That's the law. The trust activation clause was simple but elegant. Once Jessica filed for divorce, the clause activated automatically. That meant that the independent trustee, Wallace, had the legal authority to completely lock down the trust. No distributions could be made except according to the strict terms of the trust document itself. No emergency requests. No judge's orders. No negotiations. The trust was frozen solid. Jessica had thought she was walking into court to claim millions. What she actually walked into was a courtroom where her lawyer had to explain that the assets she thought were hers didn't exist in any form she could touch. The irony was that the trust structure actually protected her in a way, because it meant my anger couldn't be destructive. I couldn't punish her financially because I couldn't access the money to punish her with. I was locked into following the trust terms, which required me to provide child support, which required me to be civilized, which required me to follow the law. The structure that protected my assets also protected me from my own worst impulses. It was elegant in a way that almost made me sad. The final settlement was calculated based on state law and the marital assets that actually existed, the 5% I'd left available for division. Jessica received approximately $2 million. She also received child support of $8,000 per month until our daughter turned 18. She received the house we'd lived in together. She received a security agreement that guaranteed continued health insurance. She received, in short, far more than she could claim from the protected assets. But she also received far less than she thought she was going to get. She looked like she might cry, but she didn't. She looked like she might argue, but her lawyer touched her arm and shook his head. There was nothing to argue about. The law was the law. The trust was the trust. And she had lost. Not because I was meaner than her or smarter than her, but because I'd been paranoid enough 15 years ago to listen to my instincts. I'd been cautious enough to structure my life in a way that protected against exactly this scenario. I'd been smart enough to do the right thing and the protective thing at the same time. The social reversal was swift and visible. The friends who had sided with Jessica started reaching out to me. We didn't know the full story, they said, which was a polite way of admitting they'd believed her narrative without questioning it. My family started treating me differently, not with pity anymore, but with respect. The woman at the grocery store who'd given me a sympathetic look when Jessica was pregnant no longer looked sympathetic. Now she looked impressed. Word got around about what had happened. The media picked it up. Tech mogul survives divorce with fortune intact thanks to legal strategy, read one headline. I didn't love the publicity, but I understood what it meant. It meant that the narrative had flipped. I was no longer the villain. I was no longer the guy who didn't care. I was the guy who'd been smart enough to protect himself against exactly what had happened. It wasn't a flattering narrative, it was one that suggested I'd been suspicious all along. But it was true, and truth is always better than the lie that had come before it. Jessica, meanwhile, retreated from public life. Her pregnancy progressed. She had the baby, a beautiful daughter we named Emily. I was there at the hospital. I held my child when she was 1 minute old. I cut the umbilical cord. I felt love so profound it broke something open inside me. And I felt sadness because I'd known this was coming. I'd known my marriage was over long before the papers were filed. After the hearing, I sat alone in my office for the first time in months. Everything around me was the same, but everything felt different. My assistant brought me coffee. My brother called to congratulate me. My lawyer sent the final paperwork. But I felt hollow. I had won a legal battle that I'd never wanted to fight. I had protected assets that I'd built not to protect them from anyone specific, but to build something solid and real. I had been right to be cautious, which meant I had always known, on some level, that Jessica would betray me. That knowledge made the victory feel less like victory and more like confirmation of something I'd hoped wasn't true. I thought about all the nights I'd worked late, supposedly choosing the business over my marriage. But the truth was more complicated. I'd been working late because I was building something. I'd been working late because I wanted to create security for my family. I'd been working late because that's what you do when you want to build an empire. Jessica had seen those late nights as neglect. I had seen them as love expressed through provision. We had never actually been speaking the same language. We'd just been pretending we were, until the pretense became too exhausting. Co-parenting became the focus of my life now. I saw Emily every other weekend and 2 nights a week during the week. I was present for her first smile, her first rollover, her first word. I was a father in a way I'd never been a husband, fully present, fully committed, fully invested in her happiness. Jessica and I established a routine that, while not friendly, was at least cordial. We didn't fight over pickup times. We didn't fight over money, the court had handled that. We didn't fight over anything, because fighting required energy that neither of us wanted to spend. We were civil. We were professional. We were the blueprint for how divorced people could parent together without letting the divorce infect the child. I established a college fund for Emily, funded by the trust according to its terms. I established a life insurance policy that would ensure she was taken care of if anything happened to me. I established, in short, exactly the kind of security I'd always wanted to provide. And this time, nobody could claim it was coming from a place of control. It was coming from a place of love. A year after the divorce was finalized, I restructured my entire life. I stepped back from the day-to-day operations of my company and hired a CEO to run it. I kept ownership, but I stopped letting ownership run me. I started dating again, carefully, with clear eyes and honest communication. I started spending more time with my daughter. I started saying no to business meetings that weren't critical. I operated with transparency and boundaries. I told people directly what I could and couldn't do. I built relationships with people who were genuinely interested in me as a person, not just in my money or my status. The empire that had seemed so important, so central to my identity, started to feel like just a thing I owned rather than a thing that owned me. My net worth remained the same, but my relationship to that wealth changed completely. I stopped seeing it as something to protect against others and started seeing it as something to use for purposes that mattered. I gave more to charity. I invested in startups founded by people from backgrounds like mine. I mentored young entrepreneurs. I used the resources I'd been so careful to protect in ways that actually meant something. Looking back now, years later, I understand what I had actually been protecting. I hadn't been protecting money. I'd been protecting clarity. I'd been protecting the ability to think straight when everything else was chaos. I'd been protecting my daughter's future. I'd been protecting my ability to do the right thing even when doing the wrong thing would have hurt less. People ask me if I'm angry at Jessica. The answer is no. I'm sad. I'm disappointed. I'm sorry for the life we could have built together if we'd been more honest with each other earlier. But I'm not angry. Anger requires energy, and I chose to spend my energy on my daughter instead. Kindness, it turns out, wasn't weakness. It was foresight. It was the thing that let me protect myself while still being the person I wanted to be. The trust that saved my marriage from destruction wasn't just a legal document. It was a promise I made to myself that I would do the right thing and protect myself at the same time. That I would love and be cautious. That I would be present and be prepared. That I would be vulnerable and be smart. The ending of my marriage was inevitable, maybe. But the ending of my story was something I got to write myself. And that, it turns out, was the greatest victory of all.